My name is Martin Ware from historically the Human League, founder member, and Heaven 17. Currently working on a new Heaven 17 album, but also have a company called Illustrious, which does three-dimensional soundscapes. The interesting thing for me about doing this library is that I love the System 100. It's my favourite synth of all time. And it was the first synth that we ever owned, and it was the one that we did Being Boiled on, which is the first thing I ever recorded in 1978. So I've always had a fondness for it. But it's only really over the ensuing decades that I've realised just how good it is. And I still use it. In fact, we're writing a new Heaven 17 album and we're currently using it on the new album. It's quite an old lady now, really. I mean, it's 1976, I think it was first, so that's nearly 40 years. The sounds that you can get from the System 100 and the quality of the oscillators, the quality of the filters, the signal path, it all sounds very technical, but it's really relevant. It is from a bygone era. I suppose the analogy would be, you know, a classic car versus a highly efficient Skoda, which is what most of the current synths are like. And a lot of it's got to do with the fact that these were produced in limited quantities because they were a little bit like an experimental effort to kind of draw the average Joe from their Yamaha home organ into the world of synthesis. So when it was being marketed, it was very much about, recreate any sound you can imagine and all that stuff. And so this was like trying to keep it simple for people who were interested in this new world of the sort of thing that Walter Carlos and Wendy Carlos were doing on gigantic, expensive modular synths. Suddenly it was becoming economically feasible to buy these things for people, for a poor lad from Sheffield in his first job on HP. My first synth actually was this one, which was the Korg 700, which was 350 quid. I happened to have 350 quid in my bank account for the first time in my life when I was a computer operator. So I bought this, and actually, originally, it was Ian Marsh who bought the System 100, who was in Human League at the time. Well, it's modular, but what I like about it is that it was aimed at people rather than technologists or geeks. If you look at the original patch book, which I found online the other day, in fact the first two patch books, it's got patches for things like Funky Cat. All these things that you previously thought were impossible to create because it was pre-samplers. Though it's like an entry into a world of sound design, essentially. And I was always more interested, growing up, when I heard records on the radio, in the kind of more futuristic sounding stuff, like, I suppose, like in Good Vibrations, you know, the theremin, for instance, and even Sparky's Magic Piano, you know, going way, way, way back, the first vocoders, and anything that kind of made me think, oh, the future's so exciting, because we grew up in the space age, where the concept of the year 2000 was an amazing thing. You know, it was like, oh, that's going to be the future. How will it be then? Somehow synthesis embodied and encapsulated our thoughts and aspirations for the future, coming from a very poor background in Sheffield. And so a lot of these working class towns, say for instance, electronic music, glam music has always been very popular because it feels like a way out of the kind of, it's not a style statement, it's a kind of embodiment of the future, and optimism. It was built in 1976, the System 100, and as far as I know, it's Roland's first foray into modular synthesis. They may have had some kind of trial units, but this is the first mass-produced unit. Exciting thing about it was it had every sound you create on this machine is created from scratch. So it's basically just two oscillators and very good filters. The oscillators sound amazing. And a lot of cross-patching capability with the leads you see. plus its own mixer with its own very own spring unit. So it was like a self-contained unit. It's even got its own speakers, which sound amazing. And nobody can quite figure out why they sound amazing, but they do. And so it had a kind of functionality not dissimilar to like a home organ. The other exciting thing about it, and this is what really got to us, was the fact that there are no illegal connections. You can plug anything into anything, even if you're not meant to. You can plug outputs to outputs, and somehow the signals will flow and you will get a sound. It might be unpredictable, but there's nothing going to blow it up. So this in itself encourages creativity and not to worry about what you're plugging in where. So the sequencer was a revolutionary tool for us because it meant that we could create. It's hard to imagine a world without drum machines, but there weren't any drum machines. Maybe Dr. Rhythm was around about that time, but that was the first one, which was a tiny little thing which had a set sounds that you could do some basic rhythms on. But it was a toy, really. But there were no drum machines, so this enabled us to create rhythms at any tempo we wanted with bespoke sounds. One of our first experiments was being boiled. It's a revolutionary piece of kit for us, the System 100. And to be honest, even the iterations of developments that Roland have developed over the years have not improved on these things. Even when they went to the System 100M, which was directly after this, which was modular in the sense that you had a framework in which you could put bespoke units in, as many as you wanted. It didn't sound as good. We had one, it didn't. And we always kind of hankered after going back to that, but we had to sell that to get the System 100M, and so on and so forth. In 1992, I produced an Erasure album called I Say, I Say, I Say, and with Vince Clarke, and we started working together, creating various things, and became very good friends. And there was a knock on the door one day, a couple of days before Christmas, I think it was in 93, and it was a delivery, and it was this synth in its entirety, in its original boxes, that he'd found from some guy in Arizona and shipped across as a present, because we had to sell the original one back in the day. So this was his Christmas present to me. When we were recording Reproduction and Travelogues, the first two Human League albums, we used to have actually a rack-mounted spring reverb, which was literally a spring in a box with a speaker on one end and a mic on the other end. And that's how you created the reverb. And it's the same in that, except that's a shorter spring. I mean, I am just a fan of abstract sound, sound in general. I mean, whether it's found sound, whether it's created from scratch. I mean, can you imagine a world where the only tools you have, if you're creating a rhythm track, you have to create every kick drum, every snare, every hi-hat from scratch, everything. The challenges of creating sounds from scratch are a different set of challenges, but it makes you more creative. It's not like we had an option. This one, although having said that, we set out on a mission to create music that was all originated from oscillators. So I suppose that was a mission defined by ourselves. But to actually create those sounds is, once you got used to it, is actually easier than the endless option paralysis of endless, cycling through millions and millions of kick drums, for instance. I've got a very interesting story about this, which is when I first started working with Vince on his album, we were doing the original the actual recorded backing tracks, the final backing tracks for his demos, and I was doing it at his fantastic studio in Chertsey, where he got every analog synth under the sun, all connected via CV and gate. And he said, leave me alone for an hour and I'll do this. And he used a BBC B computer, typed in figures and the structure of the song on this piece of software called Yumi, of which he is now the only remaining person in the world who uses. And it all controlled the CV and gate for all the different analog synths. And so he created a kind of maquette of the backing track in all analog synths. and came back in an hour, and he said, "Tell me what you think about it." I said, "Well, it's fantastic, but maybe this could do this, or this could do that. Maybe this sound better if it was slightly different. Just a few tweaks, really." He said, "Go away for 20 minutes." Came back, and he had changed every sound on all the synths, and that's probably, there were 15 synths. And I'm not exaggerating, 20 minutes it took him from scratch to redo it again. And it's at that point I really had this kind of realization that creating stuff from scratch is actually more liberating than not. It's counterintuitive, but it's true. The sounds that I decided to create for this sample library are essentially a lot of polyphonic sounds that we couldn't achieve using original methods, because it was just monophonic, every sound. And so a lot of textural stuff that will sound just epic inside larger productions. There's something very fat sounding about the sounds that have emanated from this machine. So when they're layered up, I can imagine for certain applications there's going to be nothing else that you'll use for certain things, because it'll occupy the entire spectrum. Also, we wanted to do a selection of rhythmic sounds that could be sequenced, which is a lot easier than using a hardware sequencer behind me. And obviously you can layer those up as well. Plus we recorded everything both through the original speakers and directly through Neve preamps, so everything's very beautifully recorded. And there are also quite a lot of just, you probably go useless sounds, but actually there may be very useful sounds in a certain context where you're trying to embody a certain spirit of the time. Some very, I suppose you'd call, experimental sounds. I remember the earliest synths that we ever had were home-built synths from Maplin, and all you could get was experimental sounds out of them. So this was a definite advance on that. So what I've really focused on is I suppose highly usable musical sounds, which is, so it's not so much, oh, listen to this whiz-bang stuff. It's like stuff that when they're layered up, you will go, do you know what, that's going to inspire me to make a brand new track, because there's nothing else will sound like it. I like Spitfire's approach to sample libraries. I like the fact that it's very easy to integrate into your workflow because of Kontakt. And I like the design philosophy of it, and the kind of, I suppose, their attention to design detail and the usability of their libraries seem to be the reason why they're very successful. So it makes sense, obviously, if I'm going to go to the trouble of making all this, that I wanted to go to the best possible home to get out to the correct kind of customers who want to go to the best sample library company. You just want to record what came out as faithfully as possible. So you just want to make sure that it's recorded in an accurate and faithful way, and that you capture the beauty and depth of the original source material. Beyond that, I'm sure everybody's got their own methodologies of working with the material we'll provide to them. But we, obviously we used a Neve preamp, which is, top quality. And the microphones we were using were very good quality, and so on and so forth. We put attention to detail into our sound design with the work we do for Illustrious and soundscaping, and I think that informs, it all goes back to the fact that right from the start of my career, everything I've done has been kind of bespoke. And that's kind of a continual theme throughout 40 years of the stuff that we've done, and it's all about the beauty of the sound. If you imagine growing up writing pop music as but doing it from creating sounds from scratch, as opposed to just picking a guitar up, for instance, or having a band in the studio and jamming or whatever. It's like integrating production into the creation process from the original DNA of how you work. And so that's how I've always worked, and I think that's a large part of why I've been reasonably successful in the business. Digital and analog, right. So the history of synthesis, as far as I'm concerned, is one of degradation of signal. Essentially, the kind of thing, the kind of quality that the Roland System 100, for instance, has, and I suppose early Moogs and lots of other different synths of that time, is they were more or less hand-built. Some of them pre-circuit board, pre-printed circuit board, and with transistors, for instance, and sometimes even valves back in the day. So consequently, I'm not an expert in physics, but I was talking to somebody who was and is a professor of physics at the University of London, Queen Mary College, where I'm a visiting professor, and he was telling me that not only is there an economic argument for creating things that are cheaper. Of course, that's obvious. So therefore you can maximise the profit you make out of all the units you sell. But in the process of miniaturisation, which is where this has all been going over the years, there are less and less electrons being passed through the system to create the same effect, which means that you have less, if you like, it's hard to explain, but less bandwidth to work with, which then has to be kind of fixed later down the line in the processing to try and make it sound good again. So it's going through a series of processes that are trying to simulate how it sounded originally. So obviously the benefits of digital, I'm not saying everything's bad about digital, because it means, for instance, when I work on a digital audio workstation, everything I do is still pretty much, fingers crossed, touch wood, the same as when we close the system down, you open it up and everything's ready to work on again. That simply wasn't possible. To give you an example, when we used to perform live with the Human League, when we first started, we used to have a series of patch sheets. So, and that included not only changing all the knobs, not all of them, but most of them, but taking out wires, replugging wires between songs. Can you imagine this? So it just shows how the process and accidents as well, because you sometimes plug the wrong leads into the wrong things under pressure. You can't see lighting properly because the lighting guys turned all the lights down between the songs, etc., etc. And the mistakes are oftentimes the great things in analog. There's less mistakes in digital. There's more variety. I mean, ironically, we're talking about creating a sample library here. And the methodology of creating that sample library is simply unimaginable 20 or 30 years ago. So there are many, many benefits of sample libraries, and I use them every day in my compositional stuff. However, when it comes down to the detail of the original sounds, I would argue that some of that is still good coming from an analog source, hence why we've done this sample library. Working on a new Hem 17 album, which is sounding great, and I'm really happy about that. Hoping to have something, maybe a mini album out in the autumn, and the album next year. Also working on various soundscapes, three-dimensional soundscapes. We just did a huge one in Trafalgar Square for the 3rd anniversary of the Syrian conflict with Oxfam. I'm doing a film project with a Turner Prize nominated artist called Zarina Bimji about colonialization in Africa, and so that's going to be done here for a month in August. And talking to, in fact, last night I was just talking to Universal Studios about creating a 3-dimensional sound design for their theme parks. So I'm thinking I'm going over to Orlando with my kit and showing them how it's done. So yes, it's an exciting time for us. Lots of very exciting releases coming out, not the least of which is Spitfire's fantastic new. Available at all good sampling stores.